welcome to A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. And today I've decided to go with a new release, although unfortunately not a cinema release, or at least I didn't go to the cinema release. We decided to stay at home and watch the new Disney Pixar release, Luca, which we watched on Disney Plus. It's funny, really. I mean, Pixar are famously this Goliath, this monolith of animation, where everything they release is just, you know, head and shoulders above the competition. Now, don't get me wrong. You know, it's not as if DreamWorks haven't released great animations. Cloudy with a Chance for Meatballs might be one of my very favourite animated films. And of course, you know, there are. I mean, if you look at like Studio Ghibli, of course, I've covered at least one of their films. But there's just something about sort of when you see Disney Pixar, you know you're getting your big blockbuster animated film of the year. The interesting thing about Luca, of course, is the pandemic, and you could also sort of lay this onward as well. And I feel like there's a third film that came out in the last year that was also Disney Pixar that was also affected. But the fact that they have been somewhat sort of contained to Disney Plus, and there's nothing wrong with being contained to Disney Plus, but I suppose on some level it minimises the sort of blockbuster nature of them, as it has with live action fare. And so on some level it sort of takes away from that sense of, oh, the new Disney Pixar's being released, it's going to be the big summer animated film, it'll probably get nominated for Oscars, let's, you know, see what they're bringing out this time. You know, the last one that I think really did that for me, if my timeline is correct, is probably Coco. You know, Coco, it was the kind of film that brought me to tears, or almost to tears, and I think it is up there as one of the greats. And since that, the others have been good, but I don't think it's been Coco levels of quality. And you could also throw Inside Out, which of course came out before Coco, same level of high status. And again, I don't know if it's because of this limited release or restricted release, or just whether we've gone through a bit of a period of truly great films, and you cannot have A star, A star, A star all in a row. So, to sort of talk about Luca in itself, I do think that there's something about the animation, and you have to acknowledge the journey that, the history and legacy that we have in terms of, specifically, water, the relationship we have with animation, and depictions of the world of underwater to land. You know, of course, this owes credit to, of course, going all the way back to Little Mermaid, which of course is getting its live action remake sometime, I think, next year. And then you go to Finding Nemo, and of course Finding Nemo was the great 3D animated film that allowed us an insight into how we could see an animated depiction of the deep. You know, we spend more time underwater in that film than we do above water, and that was, you know, revolutionary. And you know, we've had this constant sense of depicting the otherworldliness of underwater. You know, I mean, you could throw Ponyo in there as well, and of course this, like Little Mermaid, Ponyo continues that same, you know, Hans Christian Andersen style story of a character who lives in the underwater but wants to come to the land of the land dwellers, and it's a new retelling of that, or at least a something that is inspired by that kind of story. And in that respect, it is an interesting story to tell, and the way that it reimagines that, in the same way that Ponyo reimagined that, where you think, okay, I can see the skeleton of Little Mermaid in this, but it's gone in such a wild different direction that, you know, you could watch it without the association. In the same way with this, you don't have to have a knowledge and go, oh, I can see the allusions here, I can see the acknowledgements. You watch this and you could watch it and not make that association, that it stands alone in its own sense. And of course Pixar, you know, quite intelligently have realised that what they can now do in their storytelling is expand our world. That not every story has to be told from the perspective of a Western white family, and that we, you know, and I would almost say this is due to, you know, a debt to Coco on some level, although I'm sure there's a tradition that exists beyond that. But that sense of, why don't we explore different cultures, different communities, and tell stories like this, but from those perspectives, and make it so that, you know, this more traditional sort of perception or perspective isn't the default. Because when you watch Luca, there's nothing about Luca that you watch and go, oh, I don't relate to this. You know, it does really have its feet planted in sort of Italian culture and the things that are important to, you know, depicting Italian communities. And I hope, I mean, unfortunately, I am not the one to say, but whether that it has done it correctly or whether it has done it from a bit of a, but you know, whether it's done a bit of a Pocahontas, and it's not a good depiction. I personally think, from a first viewing and with no real opinion, that I think it did, and it makes it feel relatable, and you look and go, yes, I think this is what I understand to be an Italian community in the way they interact, and yet make it relatable. What I also like about the film is sort of Luca and Alberto, who are our two male leads. You know, I like the fact that the way that it depicts the world from the underwater perspective, which again is this incredible landscape that's just, you want to spend time there, and it's got its own structure and world building, and you go, you know, and the way that things interact looks amazing. But then what it then does is, of course, Luca meets Alberto, they both are on the land, and of course it does that thing where it's the splash rule, as it were, where they are like sea monsters, but as soon as they enter, once they leave the water, they're changelings, so they immediately take human shape. And it sort of very quickly sort of waves that away and goes, yep, that is just a thing. They, you know, it doesn't need to sort of go into detail of why that is, it is just how they work. But then what I like about that is that it then goes into detail about the fact that we've stepped in from the perspective of these creatures, how their world works, you know, we've accepted it, but then they are learning to adapt to land and to having human bodies, and they're sort of learning how to, they're learning about humanity, but from an outsider's perspective, and I think that's a really neat way to tell a story, because it makes things that we should know and that are relatable to us alien, and they're having to sort of learn how to interact with humans and how to fey being human. And I think that's really that's you know, a good way to sort of flip the script and give us a sense of, oh, things we know, things we don't. Maybe these things are interchangeable. And then, of course, you have the sort of queer reading of it, and you know, once you sort of look at the trailer, you think, oh, this is a queer text. You know, that there is something, Call Me By Your Name about it, that's sort of been thrown at it. I see the text there, and I was watching it with that in mind, but then I realised, as I was watching it, that that's what I was looking for, and I checked myself in that respect, because there is, you know, easily you could read romantic connotations between Alberto and Luca, and then a potential love triangle, you know, between Alberto, Luca, and Juliet, the girl, and sort of a potential bisexual representation. And that is interesting, and that's really been called out for a long time. And ideologically, the idea of this character who's torn between this young man who wants to go off and travel the world, and he wants to do the same, but this girl who's much more grounded but quite feisty, and she goes to school and has a certain amount of stability that he also wants. The fact that he's rejected by, there's a rejection plot by his parents, and the fact that he's fled from his parents because they wanted to send him away with his uncle because they don't like the way that he is changing. That's more to do with sort of the sea monster to human change, but subtextually, of course, you can read that as being a queer text about parental rejection of sexuality. And then, on the other hand, I do think, the other side of this is the fact that these are children. And yes, you can still apply queer reading to children, pre-pubescent characters, because the way that children learn and understand is through, just because they might not have an understanding of romance, it doesn't mean that they aren't learning about it as they grow, before they go into puberty. And you can then say, well, so it can still exist there, but at the same time, these are children. And so I think there is something, a shame, because it is about friendship. And you can apply that triangle more to the idea of children struggling to, maintain their friendships, and something something children would relate to. And I don't want to ignore the queer text. I do think it's there, and I do think an adult would see that. But I also wanted to check myself in that respect and say, well, this isn't as straightforward as this is a romantic triangle, and that's sort of where these characters are. I don't want to ignore the fact that this could also be seen as a platonic triangle with potential allusions to further romantic development. But I do appreciate that this is really important for LGBTQIA storytelling, and the fact that, in terms of representation, in terms of depiction, especially for children, or kids' films, and the idea that queer text and queer characters are still struggling to be identified within children's narratives because it's seen as somehow perverse or inappropriate, which is palpably wrong, but so I appreciate that sort of representation is important, and so yes, the text is definitely there, and there is definitely something "Call Me by Your Name," especially in the first act, about it. So those are the things I really like, and those are the things I really thought about. And then there's the other side of it, which is, I do think, as I said, we hit this huge peak with Inside Out, which I think people will, for decades, will hold as one of the great Pixar films, and Coco, which I definitely hold as one of the greats, and I think is also, on that same level, a great Pixar film. I think, unfortunately for Luca, there is something a little bit conflicted about it. I think it tries to do that storytelling model, where it wants to tell grand ideas about communities and rejection and othering and division and bigotry. It also wants to talk about sexuality and self-discovery and the formation of relationships. And then it also has this story about the children doing a race, and there's a Vespa that they want to get so they can go travelling, and there are all these quirky characters in this community, and the mother and father are still looking for Luca. And I do think it gets a little bit lost, because you can have these macro stories about these big ideas whilst also having an intimate story about characters and balancing them together. And I think Pixar are normally very good at finding the balance between them. However, I don't think it quite managed it here, because it did feel like you had a really interesting concept about the sea monsters, about the way that they're treated. They're sort of feared by humans and mutually are afraid of humans, and the sort of relationship with this community. And I just think that the bigger ideas and the smaller ideas aren't, that's this race concept and the bully, they aren't quite compatible. They don't quite line up in a way that it's sort of, when it comes to the end, that it's satisfying, and you really see it as you get to the third act and the end and the climax, that it feels jumbled and it struggles to sort of measure these ideas and put them side by side, which I do think is a shame, because I do think it's a fun film. I just don't know if it's a great film. But I did enjoy it, and like I said, there's a lot to chew on and a lot of really good ideas here. And like I said, the visuals are beautiful. The way it depicts landscapes, the way it depicts even, you know, relatable things like the town, Porto Rosso, and again the way it portrays characters, I think is interesting. I just don't know if all the ideas came together completely. But yeah, that's fun. It is what it is. Not every Pixar can be Coco. Anyway, thank you for joining me. If you like this video, hit the like button, comment below, and share this video, because it'll help with the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell to get notifications of when new videos are uploaded. Check out my back catalogue of over 150 videos, and follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley, where I'm always tweeting about TV shows and films, and I share these videos once they're uploaded to YouTube either the day of or the day after. Thank you for joining me. Take care.